Okay, I was born and raised in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, New York. That's where its relationship with New York starts, and that's where it stops. It's geographically New York, culturally, and whichever in every sense of the word, think about it either as 18th century Eastern Europe, or if you want a more contemporary example, think Mea Shearim in Israel. It's an enclave, so to speak, of ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jews, predominantly members of the Satmar Hasidic sect. Some of you might know Satmar as these people who are very openly and strongly opposed anti-Zionism and anti-Israel. However, they don't make up everything. They're about 80%, the other 20% is a mix of different Hasidic sects. It is, however, the only neighborhood in the world that's not dominated by a specific sect. It's just in the city, but it's 100% Hasidic, meaning all the Orthodox Jews who live in Williamsburg are Hasidic. What that means is that the language in the streets, in schools, and at home is Yiddish. We all speak Yiddish. I grew up speaking Yiddish as my first language. As a second language, we learn Hebrew, although not a modern Hebrew. It's a lot more of Hasidic / Ashkenazi pronunciation of Hebrew. My third language personally was actually Aramaic, which I started learning in fourth grade, and then even more so when I went to yeshiva. And finally, I only learned English when I was 20, so 5 years ago. It is fairly common. We do study a bit of what we call English, which consists of ABCs and math, which goes up to a long division. We don't have any science, history, anything like that is non-existing. It is illegal technically, but maybe I will talk a bit about that more, but this is what they do. People who grew up as girls, and just as a disclaimer, in case any of you didn't know, I'm transgender, and I'm very open about it, obviously. So the way, whenever I talk about boys or girls in that community, I talk the way they perceive it. I'm personally very conscious when I talk about gender, so I'm not trying to say that everyone that's perceived as a boy or as a girl in that community is rightfully so, but the way they look at it. Girls get a slightly better education when it comes to a general education, meaning most women in the community speak English, probably with a strong accent, but they speak English. They know a bit about history, about social studies, and so on. And however, they get a lot less of religious education, coming from a belief that women don't have to study Judaism that much because women are second class when it comes to Judaism, although they're never going to say that, but that's very much what it is. I come from a family of 13. I have 12 siblings. My mother has 10 siblings. My father has 10, my mother has 8. I have a total of about over 60 living aunts and uncles. And if you don't believe me, I can still start counting their names. Counting aunts and uncles and great aunts and great uncles. So that's pretty much what everyone in the community, which is very standard in the community, big families, which comes from a belief of twofold, of having a lot of kids and of not using any form of birth control. Even more in the community, I mean, some of you probably know, but I can go on, like you're talking about people who dress in, the media likes to call it 18th century clothing, which is what I'm going to talk a bit later, what the media likes to do. I personally just look at it as their own unique dress code, which is slightly based on an 18th century dress code for man and woman. Most women, although it's hard to know exactly the percent, but officially all the women are supposed to. I definitely know that some women don't. Married women are supposed to shave their heads, not just cover their heads, but shave their heads and then cover it. I would say about half of the women in Williamsburg and in Hasidic sects in general either don't wear wigs at all, just cover their heads with some form of, I don't even know how to call it in English. Huh? A cloth, yeah, we call them a tichel, in case you're wondering. And a lot of women who do wear wigs will even cover their wigs. Women don't drive, not as much as it's not allowed, as it's really, really taboo. There are some women who do, but in general it's really taboo. The standard education system is you go to a school, which is a religious school, segregated by gender. You start standard. For girls, it's a very standard, at least age-wise, educational system. You are in school until after 12th grade, and then there's no such thing as college. College is one of the biggest taboos to exist. You can get shunned by your family, and I'm not talking hypothetically. I have a few friends who got shunned by their families just for going to college. They stayed religious and went to college, and they were shunned by their families for that, which is not everyone. Some families are slightly more open. Again, like everything that I'm saying is very much my own experience. And I know there's always going to be people going to be like, no, I know a family that's different. So first and foremost, if you're not Hasidic and you know a Hasidic family, then that family is different by default because they know you. But even if not, there's obviously families that are different. There's no way, even for a community that's so sheltered and so you might look at them and just see like they're all dressed alike, there's obviously differences. And it's very much my own experience, the way I grew up, and the people around us. It's obviously not just my family. In addition to that, one important part when it comes to media and technology, there's no access to TV. TV is a battle that they fought in the 60s, and they successfully won. TV is literally non-existing. And again, I wouldn't say there's no couple that has a TV in their bedroom and no one knows. There probably is, but at least officially no one has TV. Internet is also forbidden to some extent. They really try to fight it. They thought they're going to do with the internet what they did with TV, which is to make it like no one has it. But they quickly realized that internet is becoming a part of our life. So like by now, there's a big industry of filtered and what they call kosher internet, which even that is only permitted for people who need it to work and so on. Like, for example, people who are not married, because you don't work if you're not married, are not supposed to have cell phones, period, even if it doesn't have internet. But specifically after that, you're not supposed to have internet. There's no access to magazines, newspapers, movies, TV shows, music. I think anything that you think about a teenage boy or girl or in the middle who is trying to live a life and has a sense of culture, almost anything that people outside of that world consider culture. And by outside that world, I include even people who are modern Orthodox, or what we would call Hamish, which is like Orthodox on a slightly different way. I don't want to say lower, although that's the way they look on it. Even people, like, they are all outsiders. Their culture is a culture that doesn't exist in that community. There's also, they are very elitist, and racist also, which is besides the point, which I don't get, the part I don't get. But they're very elitist, believing that they are on top of everyone. They might not say it to outsiders that much, but they believe that even Orthodox Jews who are not ultra-Orthodox are really bad and are going to hell. It's just something that I was always told, and I don't even want to talk about Reform Jews. God forbid. And again, that's all like what we grew up. That's like in pretty much like the community. I have to add a bit about my family. So Hasidic Judaism has also been ruled by monarchies in every sense of the word in the last 200 years. What I mean by that is there's about 10 families that have been in the leadership of Hasidic Judaism since its inception. Some of them are more known. There's the Twersky family, which is fairly known. There's the other. It's all dynasties. And the leaders today are just leaders because their fathers might have been a good leader. Maybe the great-great-great-grandfather, I don't know how many years ago, was a great leader. Now they are because it's a dynasty. And it's not just, so in what they call the Rebbes, the Hasidic leaders are the Rebbes, and they are the supreme leaders of the community in every sense of the word. These few families have also, and they are the spiritual leaders, they are financial leaders, they are political leaders. It's a lot of money. For example, in 2005, one of the biggest Hasidic Rebbes from Satmar passed away, and the rumor was that he left $500 million. So you're talking about people who are super rich, and it's money. However, I'm talking so negative about the whole system, like the dynasty system, and I come from dynasties on every side. Both of my parents, all four of my grandparents come from rabbinic dynasties. The Hasidic leaders by now are also all related to each other. If you ever read stories about medieval European monarchies and how like battles and peace and politics was all debated on just family conflicts became political battles, that's what's happening there today. For anyone who has followed, there's one Rebbe passes away, two of his kids start to fight. At the same time, they all get married to each other. The four biggest Hasidic leaders today are actually the five biggest are brother-in-laws. So you're talking, it's all stays in the family. So that's the family that I grew up in, my family specifically. Both of my grandparents had their own synagogues. Now my father has one, which he only opened up after I left, and so on. In addition to all of that, which is just the lifestyle, I was always, my birth certificate, my original one, I've updated it since, my birth certificate claimed that I was a boy. I don't have a single conscious memory of me being like, I'm a boy and being okay with it, and then realizing, oh no, maybe not. To me, it was always like, I'm a girl, and then specifically when I turned 3, and there's, for those of you who know what a chalak is, where like they cut the hair of boys when they're 3 years old for the first time, and I was like, okay, what's going on here? And then I tried to mention it once to my mother when I was 4. Her reaction very clearly told me never ever mention anything like that again. So I went through life, a long process, and I want to jump in a bit to these sources that I have here, so I'm going to skip ahead. You can find most of this online, but I got married when I got married when I was 18. I had a son when I was 19. I left the community when I was about 20, 21. It didn't happen overnight. After I left, I worked in education. I got my GED in December of 2013. Then I worked really hard on my SATs and getting into college, and I started school at Columbia in the fall of 2014, where I am right now. I started transitioning in the summer of 2015. I started hormone therapy, which is I look at it as the medical part of transition, in September of 2015, and that's where I am today. So I want to look on these sources a bit, and I named it Transgender in Judaism, a Personal and Communal Journey. I'm going to take out even from these. This is already a shortened version of a curriculum that I've written, which is online for any of you who want. This printout comes from a website called Sefaria, which is one of my favorite websites. It's the biggest database of Jewish texts and Jewish source sheets from all different, you have from really Orthodox people, not that many ultra-Orthodox people, but a lot of Orthodox people writing on it and creating curriculums and source sheets on it, to totally secular. So it's an amazing database, an amazing place. So on there, if you want to stalk me on Sefaria, you will find a bit more. This is just a short version, and my biggest goal here is 3 things. I want all of you to walk out from this door later today convinced that twofold. Judaism 2,000 years ago recognized that gender is not male or female, gender is not black and white. And at the same time, religion aside, you will see from all of these texts that transgender is not some 60s countercultural Stonewall riots idea that someone came up with, but it existed for generations. We just didn't have the opportunity to explore it. After that, I'm going to talk a bit about what's going on in the ultra-Orthodox community, specifically in the Hasidic community, about LGBT and trans issues. And then hopefully at the end, I will get to talk a bit about what the session is actually titled, which is my experience with the media and what I have learned in the last 18 months being in the media. I'm going to look straight up to sources 2 and 3. Is there anyone who wants to volunteer to read them? In Hebrew or in English or in Russian? I don't know. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. If you.
2?
Yeah.
So to our creation story, Genesis 1:27. And God created man in his own image. In the image of God created him. Male and female created he them.
Okay, stop there for a minute. If I would write a paper like that using this back and forward between singular and plural, I will get an F. Then if you realize what's going on here, the first part of the verse is talking about mainly singular. God created man, and the Hebrew, most likely ha'adam, although if you want to go into linguistics, you could also argue that ha'adam, which is translated as man, actually means humanity, but at least when you look on it. But then definitely bara oto is clearly singular, talking about one creature. And then the second part of the verse jumps into plural, Zachar nekeva bara otam. He created, male and female created he them. Fine. So that's just almost contradicting itself in the beginning. What I like about that on its own is that from the beginning, all we know, all the Torah is telling us from the beginning is gender is a mess. It's not straight up, I don't know, singular, plural, singular, it goes back and forward. you want to continue?
And the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a help meet for him."
Okay, hold on. So suddenly we are at the situation. For context, right before that is the story where Genesis 2 starts out with the earth. There was earth and there was no grass and there was no man to pray for rain. So God created Adam. God created the first man before he created animals, before anything, created a man. The man prayed, then there was rain, then it started growing grass, which is already different than Genesis 1, which I'm not going to get into. Then God created all the animals, and then Adam went through all the animals, gave them all names, and all this whole 9 yards. And then suddenly God is like, you know what? That's a bad idea. Continue.
And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the place with flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman, and brought her unto the man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh.
Okay. So the story here goes is that first God created one person, which was Adam, which was the man. Then he decided that's a bad idea. Let's create a woman. Created a woman out of his ribs. We'll see in a minute that some rabbis, and I'm talking some rabbis in the Talmud, disagree that this doesn't mean ribs, but we'll see in a minute. Created a woman out of that, and then finally coming full circle by saying the goal is still that you should get married, man and woman should become one. Literally the word is you should become into one flesh. So this is one of the earliest, like one of the most controversial parts of the Torah or the Bible. You have, starting with the Mishnah, which is a 2nd century rabbinic code. They're already talking about it even more in the Talmud, rabbinic literature, all the way down to academic biblical scholarship, which this is almost the foundation of biblical scholarship. But what's important for our conversation is we look on gender. How many genders are there? And if you open up Genesis and you want to decide, you're like, here, I'm going to be very religious, and God is going to tell me exactly what gender is. What you come out with is you have no idea what's going on. That's the biggest point that we should take away. If you want to read on your own 4 and 4, source number 4, I'm not going to go through it. The reason why I put it always in is because it's always important to get out of the way the biggest religious argument that people have against trans people, which is, hey, the Bible says that you can't cross-dress. It's literally the only problem that you can find in the Bible about transgender. I personally don't think that trans people cross-dress. I think if something that might apply to people who cross-dress as a performance. But still, if you look on the comment, which looks on like how halacha, how Jewish law, according to Orthodox and conservative movements, is being decided, which is a whole process. The Talmud is saying that someone who opens up the Bible and decides what the law is according to what the Bible is saying destroys the world. That's in the Talmud. I didn't make that up. In other words, you can't just take a verse of the Bible and be like, hey, it says X, Y, and Z. It doesn't work like that, at least not in Judaism. And it comes to when you look on the Talmud, then what I have here is the Talmud, Rashi, then the Shulchan Aruch, which is the final Jewish law code written in the 16th century by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who lived in the Galilee, in Tzfat. You come out to a simple conclusion that it's only forbidden if you're doing it because you want to fool someone for the purpose of committing adultery. You're talking what makes the most sense, you're talking about a gender-segregated society, and in order for you to mingle with opposite sex, you have to dress up as so, and if you do it for that purpose, it's not allowed. Shulchan Aruch clearly says that if you want to dress up on Purim because it brings you happiness, you're totally allowed. In other words, cross-dressing because it's who you are, it's how you identify, is not a problem. Not just not according to the Bible, it's not a problem according to Shulchan Aruch. And it's in here. I'm not fooling you, you can all look it up. Okay. Source number 5, and again, I don't want to read it because we are running out of time, and from my experience, people like the story better than the text. So I just want to get through it. Source number 5 is one of many examples in the Mishnah, in the rabbinical teachings, where they talk about more than one gender. The reason why I love this specific one is because it has, the way they look at it, it's just one example. They talk about an androgynous, which is comes from the same Greek word that we use today, androgynous, although it has a different meaning here. Here it refers a lot more to what we call today intersex. But in the Talmud in general, there's at least 6 different genders, maybe more, but definitely 6 that they talk about. And 2 of them are definitely something that happens to a person physically after they were born, meaning they change, they are not the same as they were when the doctor determined their gender at birth. They're called in Aramaic, actually, an ailenos in the saris. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of it. What I like about this, source number 5 specifically, is the fact of the concepts of how they look on gender, which is like, oh, there's a person who is both, who is similar to man sometimes, similar to woman sometimes both, sometimes neither. And then a conversation, whatever this is a third gender, or is this just something that you can decipher, whatever it belongs to one gender. So one rabbi clearly believing that that not just there are people that might be ambiguous and people who might go between genders, but that there is more. There's also a third gender, and that has ramifications halachically, how they actually live their life according to law. Fine. Anyone who wants to read 6? Now we're going to go back to the original Genesis and learn a bit of interesting ideas that they have of how gender was created. You want to read it? Go ahead, sure.
And God said, and let us make Adam in our image and our shape. Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar said, when Hashem created Adam Arishon, he was created as both genders. Thus it is written, male and female did he create them. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman said, when Hashem created Adam Arishon, he created him with 2 faces, one on each side. When he made Chava, he split him along the middle, forming 2 backs. They challenged him, but it is written, and he took one of his ribs. He said to them, one of his sides, similar to that which is said, and to the Tsela of the Mishkan, which is translated the side of the Mishkan. Rav Tanhuma said, in the name of Rabbi Benaiah, when Hashem created Adam Arishon, he created him as a lifeless gnat able to reach from one end of the earth to the other. Thus it is written, your eyes saw on him.
The last part I always like to put in, because I like the fact that the first man was created, and I like the pun of it. It was a mess. But also the Hebrew word, which is a golam, which usually refers to something that's not clear, something that's almost a dummy to some extent. And it's kind of saying that it says a lot about the arts of the manner, but that's not the main part. The biggest part is the first part of it, which is different interpretations of how the creation of man and woman went. And again, like we just heard the parts of it, and I don't want to repeat it again. And you can all take the source sheets and find it online to look if you want to get more details out of it. But it's the concept that the rabbis, and this was written in the 6th century, so you're talking almost 1,500 years ago, grappled with the idea and realized very openly and very clearly that when the very common thing of like, oh, God created Adam and Eve, which usually refers to homosexuality, but the same concept. When you look actually into the Bible, what does the Torah actually say? What do the rabbis say about it? It's very far from straightforward. And I mean, it's not straight. Pun intended. Okay. The next one, again, I don't want to go into, I don't want to read it. It's apart from the Zohar, which is the Bible of Jewish mysticism, which looks on gender, and the biggest part, which is written also in bold, is like, and therefore we learn that every person needs to be male and female at all time, which sometimes sounds, if any of you ever read any of Kate Bornstein's books, she's one of my favorite gender theorists. She's Jewish. Anyway, you're looking, it sounds like a modern, like as if I'm sitting in a class with discussing modern gender identity. And the fact that saying that every human being is male and female at all time, meaning everyone has female energies, everyone has masculine, everyone has feminine energies, and you got to learn how to balance them. And obviously, some people have more of one thing and less of another. But they definitely, and again, I don't want to take a stand now on that part, which is like whatever gender is a spectrum or not, but at least from the Zohar, it clearly looks like that, and that the ultimate human is not male or female, but both combined in some form. So maybe intersex is the ideal human, who knows? which is actually some cultures, it's not just Judaism, some cultures, even Native American cultures, did put what they call like two-spirit, or people who were trans in whichever form, they did perceive them as being holier than everyone else. But at least in mystic Judaism, in Kabbalah, that exists. Okay. I'm going to skip to, that's technically source number 9. It's on page 14. Page 7, sorry, 7 or 14. Page 7. This is a quote from a book called, a sefer called Shar HaGilgulim, translated to The Doors to Reincarnation. It's one of the 7 sha'arim, one of the 7 doors, one of the 7 books of the teachings of Rabbi Isaac Luria, known as the Ari, the father of modern Kabbalah, the father of Kabbalah as we know it today. He didn't write it himself. It's written by his student, Reb Chaim Vital, all written in the 16th century in the Galilee, in Tzfat. This book specifically is concerned with reincarnation and with the origins of souls. What is a soul? And I think like in Hebrew, neshama, it's something that's used as this exotic term, and rarely do people actually stop to think, what exactly is that? So this is a whole book dedicated to that. If you want to study Kabbalah, this is the last book you should study. It's one of the most complicated ones, which is exactly why I studied it, because I was trying to show off when I was 15. This was the first text, so this is where I'm coming back to my story. The reason why I put this one in here, this is the first text that I found in my life when I was 15, that for the first time reaffirmed a bit of what I was feeling, the concept of a soul ending up, and I don't like this term, but this is very much what they're using, a soul ending up in the wrong body. In other words, your biological natal sex, what your body is, and who you are, which is at least in Judaism and in Kabbalah, which is your soul, your neshama, doesn't add up. And this is the first thing, when I was 15, this is the first thing, and it kept me in my community for 4 additional years, because I was like finding this outlet that was actually affirming a bit my identity and what I was feeling. I don't have to go into it any more than the first 2 lines. Sometimes a man may reincarnate in the body of a woman. The biggest part of it, which goes even further in, is this is not a metaphorical idea. They talk about that as something that physically affects you. This is one example. Another one that I don't have in here, but it's online, is a story from a book called Magid Meisharim, translated as The Righteous Preacher, which is a book written by Rabbi Yosef Karo. So the same author who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, who wrote the Jewish Law Code. One of his less known books is a book, he was also a mystic, he was a Kabbalist. And one of his books is his conversations that he had every Friday night. He had mystic conversations with a preacher. He doesn't say who that preacher is. According to Hasidic tradition, it was an angel. You could all decide on your own who it is. Point being, one Friday night, that preacher discussed with him his wife, and which is actually historically, we know that for a fact. He was married 5 times actually, but he didn't have kids with his 3rd wife. And the preacher is telling him, you should know the reason why you're not having kids with her is because she is the soul of a male, and a male can't reproduce. In other words, the concept of it is, which again, like we can all decide, we all have different levels of belief in what you do, how much superstition you want to believe into and how much not. But it's the concept that your body and who you are might not add up. And this is not just hypothetical. They believe that this actually affects you in life. That actually is going to determine whether you can reproduce or not. That's actually going to determine how you live your life. And we're talking here about the 16th century. So religion aside, they discussed that in the 16th century. Page 9 is another thing that I do want to read through. This is from a book called Razindo Raita. It's a collection of pure mysticism. So I know I didn't explain really what Hasidic Judaism is. So Hasidic Judaism today, I think you all got it, is kind of a culture. However, originally Hasidic Judaism was very, very far from that. It was a populist movement. It was a movement determined to undermine the hierarchy in Judaism. It was a movement determined to prove that every Jew, no matter how big of a scholar you are, has a value, There's a saying from the Baal Shem Tov, and I know that's very heavy, but listen to that. The Baal Shem Tov said, if you're killing someone, there's still blood dripping from the knife, and you can't walk in a synagogue and start praying, you haven't stepped on the doorstep of Hasidus. In other words, it's the concept that there's no such a thing as evil, and every person, no matter how low you think you are, you actually have a purpose. And obviously, they didn't condone murder. Don't get that wrong in any way. So a big part of why they did their theology was taking Kabbalistic teachings and putting it into day-to-day life. Some Hasidic sects totally got rid of it. I personally still did grow up with a lot of parts of that. Some of the sects that still have heavy Kabbalistic teachings is Chabad, Breslov, and some others. So this is a collection of Hasidic teachers from the first generation of Hasidus, you're talking in the 18th century, of their writings. This specific one is a teaching from a Rebbe, Rabbi Chimacha from Zolochiv. And this is a quote that I actually showed that to my father when I came out. So I had a long conversation with my father that didn't end well, but I really tried, and this is one of the texts that I showed him. The reason why I chose this one, there's a lot of texts in Hasidic teachings that talk about gender in this way. It's also because my father and obviously I myself are descendants of that Hasidic Rebbe. He's talking in the context, he's talking here about Yitzchak and Rivka, Isaac and Rebekah in the Torah, in the Bible. For those who know, there's this whole story how they didn't have kids for 20 years, and they started praying to God, and finally it says that God answered his prayers. So starting in the Talmud, the rabbis for generations always asked why his prayers and not her prayers. So he has another interpretation of that. And here, I'm going to read it myself just because I like it. It is known that when Isaac was born, he was born with the soul of a female. As it is written in Orach Chaim, and through that kaida, the binding of Isaac, he got a male soul that can influence, meaning can impregnate. With that, we can understood why they are more infertile humans than animals, even though that they both got the same blessing. It will not be within your animal's infertility. That is because humans have a soul, and the soul can end up being the wrong one. But this is known according to the secret, the mystic interpretation of reincarnation, that at times a female would be in a male body because in the reasons of reincarnation, the soul of a female would come to be in a male. That is why it says that by Isaac that Hashem answered to him and not to her, because he needed divine help. She was good, he needed divine help. And again, there's numerous, this is just one example, but in here also, like the interpretation is saying that affected them in real life. It's not some mystic metaphorical idea. It's a concept that's saying that someone had again, I don't like the term wrong soul, but at least when we're talking in their context, your soul can end up in a body that doesn't match, and that will end up affecting you in reality. I want to read the final, so source 12 is my most important one, and I'm not going to read through it because it's long, but please read it. What it is, it's a poem from a 13th century rabbi. His name was Kloinimus ben Kloinimus. He's really well known as a poet. Some of his poetry that he wrote are recited in every synagogue, at least traditional synagogues, during the Yilah, the final prayer in the holiest day on Yom Kippur. So he's really revered in Judaism. However, this is a kind of almost a journal entry, this is how it sounds, from a book that he named Evan Bochen, which is really interesting. It's a really interesting book. It doesn't have a genre. It's not commentary, it's not law, it's not poetry. It's just a mix of a lot of different things, which is why it flew under the radar for a long time, and probably why it never got censored out. And he goes into talking, and like the first time I read it, besides crying, it also reminded me of a coming out YouTube video of like a trans person, like which is a lot. We're really known for having YouTube channels. And like you just go, the way he is talking, it's just like describing. Let's see if I can find some. Whatever. I don't want to go into that. But like just describing their urges to be a woman. And he finishes with a really poetic prayer, written in Hebrew, and I have it translated into English, where he is alluding to a lot of references in tradition where stuff changed their physical appearances, and kind of a prayer to God, asking God that he should be a woman. And I'm just going to read through it. It starts in the middle of page 11. Father in heaven, who did miracles for our ancestors with fire and water, you changed the fire of childhood so it would not burn hot. You changed Dinah in the womb of her mother to a girl. You changed the staff to a snake before 1,000,000 eyes. You changed Moses' hand to leprous white, and the sea to dry land. In the desert you turned rock to water, hard flint to fountain. Who would then turn me from a man to a woman? Were I only to have merited this, being so graced by goodness, what shall I say, why cry or be bitter, if my Father in heaven has decreed upon me and has made me with an immutable deformity? When I read it the first time, my response was, it's not really immutable deformity, you just lived in the wrong century, but at least this is what it was then. Then I do not wish to remove it. The sorrow of the impossible is a human pain that nothing will cure, and for which no comfort can be found. So I will bear and suffer until I die and wither in the ground. Since I have learned from our tradition that we bless both the good and the bitter, this is a reference to where the rabbis are saying that you make a blessing when someone dies, Baruch Dayana Emet. This is where this comes from. He's equating this to death. I will bless in a voice hushed and weak, blessed are you, God, who has not made me a woman, alluding to the traditional blessing that for generations, it has been taken out. Besides Orthodox Judaism, no one says that anymore, but Orthodoxy still exists. It was traditional in Judaism, which is a blessing every morning is not maybe unto a woman, but to him, that's the same concept of making a blessing when someone dies, where you make Baruch Dayan Emet. This is just another, I think we have enough examples, but specifically that last one is what I love just from because it's a real life, it's a person that we know a lot about from the 13th century. He didn't get us from the internet. Facebook didn't corrupt him. No, all of these other BS explanations that you will get from people who just want to hate trans people today, none of that could apply. And it's very clear that this was someone who lived, who was socialized as a man, and clearly identified as a woman. We're done with text, I promise you. So I think this is the part where you clearly see that Judaism, at least for generations, in one way or another, and again, I'm not going to try to say that Judaism was more advanced than the ACLU today. I'm not trying to say that we have been the most progressive, we're more progressive in the 22nd century. That's not the point. What I am trying to say is that anyone who's trying to claim their hate or their intolerance against LGBT people and religion is fooling themselves. Their problem is not religion. For those of you who like Taylor Swift, haters gonna hate. There's some people, and I think it's always important, and I've done advocacy and transgender advocacy for 18 months, and I've learned that fairly quickly. Engaging with religious people and trying to convince them that that's not what religion said is not going to help a lot. Because besides some people who are legitimately, their problem is religion, most people wouldn't accept it for whichever reason, for a variety of different reasons, and most of the time, people just can't wrap their heads around something that they're not used to. People are afraid of change. People are afraid from something that they don't understand, and so on. I had it personally with my father. I came out to him with the help of a rabbi, which is actually from where source number 13 comes from, that rabbi, Rabbi David Ingber, who is the founder and rabbi of Romemu, a Jewish Renewal Synagogue in the Upper West Side. And we tried talking to him. And first he tried to say, hey, there's no such thing, trans people don't exist. We started showing him texts and Judaism and actually cornered him to the point where he was like, okay, yeah, trans people do exist, but how do you know? So I told him, I think 2 therapists and a doctor and 23 years of miserable life is enough for me to know. But he didn't accept it. And it was very clear to me that his problem is no longer really religion. It's a cultural problem. Sorry, I'm going to...
I just wanted to ask, the rabbi was on board?
Oh, yeah. Roman was one of the most progressive synagogues and communities that I know in every way that is still very deeply, they have a very deep Jewish tradition, a very, not Orthodox, they're part of the Jewish Renewal Movement, which is something that you can't,
Reform?
No, very far from Reform. They're if you're going to put ultra-Orthodoxy on one side, secular Jews on the other side, with ultra-Orthodoxy, modern Orthodoxy, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionists, let's say, and then you want to place renewal on the spectrum, they don't fit anywhere. It's they have like aspects from Hasidic Judaism. They have a very, what they call halachic culture, whatever. Again, I don't want to talk about it too much more. If any of you want to learn more about Jewish renewal, look up Reb Zalman Shechter Shalomi, who was, is it funny? He grew up Orthodox, went to Ramaz, for any of you know some Orthodox communities. Then he went to Israel, became ultra-Orthodox, went to Mir for a while. Then he left everything, became a Buddhist. And yeah, he was a Buddhist for a while, and now he is a renewal rabbi. So you took someone who I really related to, someone who has tried a lot of different things. Yeah. So this is from where like 13 comes from, which is looking at it. But to finish off the part of looking on transgender in religion, transgender in Judaism, don't let anyone tell you, and I am very fierce in that, and I've been talking about it for 18 months, and I plan to talk about it for another 80 years. It's a lie. You want to blame someone, please leave God and Judaism out of it. Okay. What's the time? Wow, okay. Are there any questions before I continue? If not, I can continue to talk, but I want to get some questions. Go ahead.
You keep mentioning your father.
Yeah.
Why not your mother?
Good point. I called up my father and I told him, I want to share something with you and Mom. He's like, no, let me hear it first. And I spoke to him, and then I told him I want to talk to Mommy. And he's, no, don't talk to her. Which is a sad part that he controls her all the way, but you know, I think I would have. I always had a closer relationship with her. And I do think I would be able to talk to her, but I'm kind of not allowed to. Meaning, they wouldn't, my father is the one who's in control, and if he says no, then no. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I've studied about the origins of Hasidut and how it's very almost like, not bohemian, but it was countercultural, it was revolutionary, it was deeply steeped in these esoteric things.
Yeah.
It seems like kind of the hippie movement of its time. How did that then transform or morph into this world that you described that is so insular, so rigid, and so counter to what the origins seem to be?
That is a great question, and it's a question that anyone who has studied Hasidic Judaism will question. There's obviously some movements who are more open in different ways, such as Chabad, Breslov, and again, like in Israel, there's some movements who are slightly more open, all in different ways, different forms. But you're right. It's not even, I always joke that Hasidic Judaism today has as much to do with what Hasidic Judaism was 250 years ago as Christianity has with Judaism. Meaning, has some flares of it, has some allusions to it. And depending on the sect, some sects still have, like my community where I grew up, which was actually very known for like singing and dancing, I do think there's some essence of Hasidus left. But I mean, to give a very short answer, how that happened specifically is actually, so when Hasidus started, which is known, the rabbinic establishment was against it, was fighting it. Hasidus still won, so to speak, and within 50 years after the Baal Shem Tov passed away, they controlled almost the majority of Eastern Europe, were Hasidic Jews. But they were still kind of at odds with the establishment, so to speak. That changed a lot once the Reform Judaism, the Enlightenment, it wasn't Reform at that point, but the Enlightenment started coming out of Germany and started creeping into Poland and later Ukraine. That's when what we call the Misnagdim, or like now the Lithuanian Yeshivish community, joined forces with Hasidic Judaism to fight the Enlightenment. And slowly they all came closer. So like by now, like the Yeshivish community has adopted a lot of singing. They've all, some more, some less, specifically in Israel, they've adopted a lot of Hasidic ideas. But then Hasidic Judaism became a lot more and more rigid. And then it didn't take on the form that it has today until around the 60s. So after, part of it was a direct response to the Holocaust. The way they did it, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, we'll come back to you, yeah. No, okay.
I noticed on page 7, it says, we read that, but you didn't finish the sentence. I noticed it said, sometimes a man may breathe made into the body of a woman because of a sin, which is homosexuality or something similar. So I wanted to know your opinion, or opinion of people that you share your views with. Do you feel like it's like God made a mistake, or it's a punishment, or what is it that you...
Let me say a very unpopular statement. When someone has cancer, did God make a mistake by giving them cancer? Are they allowed to go to the doctor? and change and heal themselves? How do you look at it? Is it a mistake? When someone is sick, is it a mistake? If someone is born with a heart problem, is it a mistake? I don't think trans people are a mistake. I don't think anyone, I mean, there could be people who argue that, but like, I haven't mentioned mistake for a single, you listen to me, and then you can look me up online. There's probably like 20 to 25 hours of speeches that I never say mistake, because I don't think it is a mistake. I mean, personally, I have my own, I never like to talk about philosophy. I have my own very personal opinions about God or philosophical opinions, which doesn't matter for the purpose of this. But if you're looking from a religious perspective, no, that's exactly what God wants, is for you to transition, if that's what works best for you. Like, taking hormone therapy is not you're like, hey, God did something, I'm going to go and change it. That's exactly what God had in plan for you, if you're looking if you're coming from that perspective. I personally, the way I look at it is everyone has the right to be who they are. I have a professor who says there's about 8 billion human beings in the world, about 8 billion gender identities, and about 8 billion sexual identities. And I think it's accurate. We all have, and as I mentioned, like at least the Zohar definitely believes that every person is male and female. And you just have some people, and we see that with all. I don't think there's a single part that you can determine that. I don't think there's a single feminine feature that you can say that only girls have, a single masculine feature that only guys have. There's always, everything that we perceive as male or female is a social construct. It's the way we perceive it. I'm not saying it's all not real. I'm not saying it's not real, but there's definitely, we are all evidence. In this room, for example, I'm going to assume, and I'm not going to tell anyone to undress, but I'm going to assume that there's pieces of clothing here that could go either way, that people wear, which is something that happens everywhere and has been like that forever.
What are your thoughts on how the media portrays the trans community, and particularly Caitlyn Jenner, who's become like the
Of course, someone is going to ask that. So actually, I'm glad that you asked that, because that was actually the original goal of the session was supposed to be that. And since I didn't have a projector, we had to wing it. But so the media, as much as certain people, including, and I'm sorry for mentioning politics, including some person living in a really white house, wants to believe us that the media is a thing. The media is not a thing. There's no such thing as the media. That's first and foremost. I've done interviews with every major media network in the U.S. I've worked with the New York Times, the New York Post, NBC, CNN, Fox News, New York Magazine, Vanity Fair. I can continue. None of them are alike. None of them have the same goals. None of them have, but most importantly, none of them have like a plan. I have met directors and CEOs of huge media companies, and I still haven't even get the slightest sense from anyone that they have a manifesto of a goal that they want to achieve. Their biggest goals of all of them is clickbait, meaning the most clicks they can get on a news article, and most of the time, money. Who are their supporters, who are their constituents, but they're all very, very different. Now, as a general perspective, I am actually fairly comfortable with the way they portray trans issues. The only media network that I've had a really hard time with, that I've done a short TV segment with, is Fox News. They're also the only media outlet, and I've worked with in total, I think I've done like over 80 different interviews. I don't even remember, whatever. The only media outlet that straight up lied was Fox News. They all manipulated facts. Besides more independent networks, which will do a better job, most big networks manipulate facts. They're the only one. I mean, it wasn't really lies that changed the story, but some statements they knew were not true. I told them openly not to say that, and they would still say it. So in general, obviously, there are some that are better, there are some that are worse. Overall, I think we are going in the right direction. The media definitely played a really big part in making trans people something that everyone talks about. I mean, I think I'm going to guess, and I don't want to judge any of you, but I'm going to guess a lot of people in this room decided to come because they saw something transgender. It's a hot topic, which is a good thing to some extent. That's exactly what Caitlyn Jenner is also. I don't agree with any of her opinions. I've met her twice, and one of them was a really heated argument. But I think what she did, at least in the beginning, was a really great thing. it got to a point that there was a poll done in 2014 where we asked how many Americans know about trans people, know about a transgender person, like not just the concept. It was only about like, I think 9 or 10%. After she came out, within a few months, it went up to 30%. So like she definitely did a really big favor. However, I mean, I'm not going to tell her what to say, and I think every human being has the right to say whatever you want to say. And for that entire family that she's part of, she's one of the only people that actually has some merit, I think. She was a really great athlete, and like she was actually a champion. Like, yeah, it actually makes sense. So like she has the right to say whatever she wants. I personally don't feel like she's my spokeswoman, and I don't want her to. But yeah. There's a lot of great people who write about gender and transgender issues who are older than, and I'm 25 and I'm still saying that, who are older than 35. Millennials, specifically in college campuses, and it's amazing what we're trying to do. But I personally sometimes disagree with the methods, meaning I actually agree. You said 15. I personally have once seen a list of 71 different sexual and gender identities, which I totally love. However, I agree that that might not be the best way to educate people. Because people, you're talking 20 years ago when you said transgender, people were like, trans what? Like no one knew what you were talking about. So like we accomplished a lot, and there's a method to the madness, so to speak. There's a way of doing it. Just be aware that every human being, every person in this room, and I could probably do that. We can probably do a quiz here for 2 hours, and we'll come down that there's a single person here that has the same sexual preference and a single person here that has the same gender identity in every form than the other person. We are all unique. So I think once you know that, it's a lot easier for you to perceive everything else. Just knowing we're all unique. All the details, it's amazing if you can educate yourself, but I'm not going to tell you that if not, you're evil. Meaning if you don't understand it, there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. You don't have to understand everything fully. It's important to be open that you don't understand it either. I always joke that like, no one is asking straight cis people to understand exactly what trans people feel. Just like I don't understand asexuality, which are people who have no interest in sexuality. I don't understand it, but I'm open to the idea that this is something that I don't understand. And that's totally okay. I don't have to understand everything. Just like I don't have to understand exactly why someone chooses to wear a certain dress on a certain day. It's whatever. People have their own identities, and we don't have to understand it fully. Just being aware of that and being open to that I don't understand everything. Because there's nothing wrong with not understanding, and that's also important. There's nothing, like just being open to the fact you don't understand is important. Yeah. Huh? Unfortunately, nothing that's scheduled. Yeah, thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.